Hi, I'm Erin. I'm APMP's content manager, and you are watching On the Record with APMP. I'm joined today by Jamie, and Jamie's going to talk to us about message framing. Can you explain to me, just in a nutshell, what is message framing?
Sure. So first, thank you very much for having me. Excited to share some of these points. Message framing is the idea whereby you take your message that you're trying to get across, and instead of delivering it in a way that is how you think about it, you in turn put yourself into the shoes of your audience, and you frame it in a way that resonates with their challenges, pain points, priorities, or strategy that they're doing. So it is not about changing the substance of the message, it's about how you deliver it to make it more easy for them to consume and understand.
Right, so are we talking about like wording, or are we talking about sort of like metaphors, imaginaries?
All the above.
Oh,
okay,
amazing.
So here's an example. We see message framing in our everyday lives all the time. You see it especially in advertising. So think about this. If you look at a bottle of reduced fat ice cream, you could say this is 90% fat free, or you could say this is 10% fat. Depending on how you say that, you're going to get a very different sort of feeling and emotion. And so for those who are interested, let's say, in being conscientious about their health, things like nature, obviously 90% fat free is going to align with how they think and how they want to pursue the decisions that they make.
Right, okay. So are we talking about this in the context of proposals or in the context of just career in general?
See, I'm glad you asked that. What I'm trying to do through the messaging that I'm putting out is to help the body of practitioners within APMP understand the importance of message framing. One of the things that I see quite often is that we have very passionate people, and they're very smart, and they're very good at what they do, but they sometimes get caught in that, and so they are always trying to portray their value proposition in a way that's very personal, very important. It's how they see their professional value. And while it is really true, and it is very important, it doesn't always resonate with the executives who could be potentially revenue operations or directorial level. And they're looking at things through a slightly different lens, maybe one that's more aligned with the challenges and the priorities of the business. And so this is about understanding how we can change how we deliver our message, not who we are, not the importance of who we are, but how we could change that to make sure that it resonates and connects what we already know is the truth of what we do for the business with those strategic priorities that we often see in senior leadership.
Okay, so we're tailoring these messages completely differently depending on who we're talking to.
Correct.
How do we unearth those challenges and those pain points that we're going to address when we frame our message?
Great question. You have to be a student of the business. And people get scared by that. And people will sometimes be like, what do you mean I be a student of business? I'm not a CFO, I'm not a COO, I'm not someone who's in charge of operations. Well, you don't have to be. But what you have to do is you have to understand the dynamics of the environment you're in. So let's take as an example, you're in a company who's focused extensively on cost-cutting measures. They want to grow the business, but they don't want the costs that it takes to grow the business to rise at the same level. So if you $1 million more of revenue, you don't want to grow the costs in the same ratio. So you sit there and say, okay, well, I'm in bid and proposal management. We are highly skilled strategic resources who lift and shift critical tasks off the plate of sales. Right? By bringing in the project management structure, by bringing in the specific skill sets, our writing, our tailoring, our executive summaries, the answering of the company Q&A, things whether it be capture and BD. And so there's a clear connection. You can sit there and say, oh, well, this is what we do, we project manage. Or you could say, hey, we're an organization that brings capacity and productivity back into our sales force by lifting and shifting these activities. And oh, by the way, because we're professionals and because we do this for a living and we're experts, we can do this faster, with better quality. And because we do it faster, we can also do it generally at less cost because it's not taking these other highly skilled resources as much time. So that's just one example of where if you dig in and become a little bit of the student in the business and start to think along the lines of the senior leadership in terms of the metrics they're focused on, you can make clear connections. And so you're not changing the message, you're just changing how the message is communicated.
Absolutely. So from what I understand, there's also a psychological component to message framing, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
There's a lot of psychological elements and strategies you can bring in. And we see them in our everyday life. A lot of us don't realize it. So as an example, there's positive or gain-based message framing. So think of it as, okay, in 1 year with braces, you can have a beautiful smile. There's negative reinforcement, which could be like, okay, if you smoke, you have a X percentage of getting lung cancer, as an example. And then there's also elements of like passive framing, where you can build out websites and things of that nature, where you can say, hey, businesses grow faster online, as an example. And then there's action oriented, which is, hey, if you exercise, you will be healthier, stay safe, wear a mask, things along those lines. Now, I do have some examples if you're interested to kind of share a little bit of what this is. Okay, we see these every day. Okay, is the glass half full? Is it half empty? Is milk 99% fat-free? Is it 1% fat? Is a 90% chance of survival from this operation, or a 10% chance of dying? So these are just small examples. And then also you could think of it, okay, you've been gifted a 25% discount on your first purchase, or don't miss out on a 25% discount of your first purchase. So these are things that we see every day. And so it's constantly being used in almost every avenue of our life. And I think most people understand it at a basic level, but how you, from a corporate standpoint, from a business standpoint, how you can then employ that in your everyday life as a leader or as an individual contributor to ensure that your message is going to resonate, how you are intentionally understanding the business, the priorities, so that you can drive that message clear to your senior leadership in a way that, again, it doesn't change who you are, it doesn't change what you're trying to say, but you're connecting the dots. And if I can I share one little fact?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Love a fact.
Research shows that pre the internet boom, people were inundated with a lot of decisions, but do you know how many decisions the average person had to make when they were a pre-internet boom? Okay, I'll give you a spoiler. It's 2,500.
Oh, goodness.
Now we fast forward, what research shows right now that it's almost 35,000 decisions a day that someone has to make. Okay, so what's the takeaway from that? The takeaway from that is we are in information overload. I think most people would agree with that, and we're competing for the attention of our audience. And if your message is poorly framed, not concise, and doesn't connect the dots for your reader, it has a chance of being very easily overlooked. The lack of connection, conciseness can also impact the trust or the credibility. People will look at you and say they're disconnected from the business, they don't really understand, they're not framing this well. And that extra work that you make them to do to try to connect the dots, if they even do that, is going to diminish their ability to immediately see the value and then act in the direction that you want them to take. So we talk a lot about, okay, let's be very intentional. Be concise. Make it clear, easy, simple. More is not better. The easier it is to understand, the better the message is.
Yeah.
Focus on connecting the dots. Don't make your readers or your audience work to understand your message. I think this is something that will resonate a lot with bid and proposal managers. We do this every day in executive summaries, right? You would think of that. But what's really funny is when we take it out of the proposal and we think about how we represent ourselves, our value proposition, how we interact across the hierarchical ladder of our organization, we don't often employ this. And so we have to get out of the purely emotional element of it, and we have to start to employ being a student of the business.
No, that makes a lot of sense. When we're talking about message framing, you'd said that it's important to be very intentional. And I get the feeling from a lot of what you're saying that it's harder to sort of walk back an impression you've given once you've already given it. So being intentional about your messaging from the beginning. How can professionals in their organizations start implementing this from today?
Absolutely. So one, there's a lot of research that you can go out there. If you want to get much more deeper into the science, you can do that. But then just ask yourself the number one question that you can ask yourself, anybody, whether they have a robust understanding of framing and reframing or is just beginning to embark on this, is to say, one, does this message make sense to other people, or does it only make sense to me? There's a lot of times we assume that what is clear and obvious to us is clear and obvious to others, that connecting the dots. So the first question you say to myself is, okay, would this make sense to somebody else who doesn't understand or have any knowledge of the situation? The second thing I would say to myself is, am I making sure that I'm connecting the dots and explicitly telling them the important things they need to know? Or am I making them work for it? Third thing I would say is, all right, now that I've done all that, how can I make this more concise? And then lastly, at the end is, do a litmus test. Give it to somebody else who's not aware of the situation and say, do you understand this? Is this easy? What did you take away from this? And these are practices that we can do right now without having to go get a degree in psychology. And just, it's the more you do it, the easier it becomes. The more you understand the business by taking the time to say, okay, what's the priorities? If I'm a CFO and the CFO is really focused on budget, cost, and numbers, okay, I frame it in that way. If I'm working with sales and sales is really focused on pipeline attainment, growing the amount of opportunities that we can support, am I framing it in that way? Mm-hmm. And there was a great example. I did a case study as part of this, and I said, okay, bid and proposal management, tell me what you think your value proposition is if you were in an elevator. Someone said, hey, what do you do? Oh, we're awesome. We're bid and proposal management. We're experts on how to drive the RFP process. We lift and shift the work from sales. We support through project management. We drive differentiation, writing, et cetera. I said, okay, great. Now you go to sales and say, what are the top challenges and priorities that you're faced with? What are you dealing with on a day-to-day basis? And they said stuff like, oh, pipeline growth, loss of customer-facing time, field productivity, we have too much administrative work. And then when you align that, do you see a clear alignment between all of that? You could probably draw some conclusions, but it's not crystal clear. It's not super easy. So then you can say to yourself, okay, how can I take that? And so example I gave is like, okay, if pipeline growth is overwhelming and we're losing time in front of customers because we have too much administrative work, we could also say, all right, our team helps that by lifting and shifting it, but we could say something like, oh, a proven global model where we combine people and technology to be able to empower processes that operate at 35% less cost, while also returning an average of 6 days per RFP to allow our field to go deeper and wider in the pipeline. I know that sounds like a mouthful, but to an executive, they're going to get a few things. One, they're going to say, oh, wow, they're leveraging technology. They're driving the execution of activities at less cost, which we all do. And then second to that, they're now also given productivity back to specifically address our goal of being able to pursue more pipeline. So it's all the same things that they said, we're just reframing it to make sure it touches upon the strategic priorities of what the senior leadership is looking for.
It seems like a lot underlying this message framing is just remaining curious. It feels like there's so much curiosity that has to happen, both of yourself and your own intentions, and of the goals and needs of the people you're talking to.
Exactly, but that goes back to being a student of the business.
Yes, of course.
Right? So again, you don't have to try to be someone that you're not, but get out of the bubble of your immediate environment and understand the pressures and the priorities and the dynamics that are going on in the business. Because what you will find is that you are much more a part of the solution to much of that than what you probably advertise and advocate for your organization. You don't have to be the whole answer to something, but if you're a part of the answer and it's proven and they can rely on you then to help solve some of their problems, that gets you that seat at the table. That allows you to have a credible voice. That creates value and relevance in your organization. So much of it is, again, just taking the opportunity to be curious and to be a student of the business.
And you can apply this, I suppose, in almost anything. I mean, you can apply it to your own career progression outside of a specific company.
Absolutely.
You can apply it to...
It's not about bid and proposal management. It's not about the industry or the profession. This is something that is about human nature and the dynamic that we see across a lot of business, where you have senior leadership and you have everyone inundated with too much information and having to prioritize what they spend mental capacity on. And then you have the human nature of what we're passionate about, what's important to us, and how we like to say our value message, and then how does that connect and how is that perceived by others?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for talking to me today, Jamie. It was great to see you. You'll notice in front of you there is a little gold microphone, and it says "On the Record with APMP," and that is yours to keep. It is a little souvenir of your time here as one of our first guests on the show.
Thank you so much.
Great.
Let's go!